Hello, this is Dr. Garrett Castleberry, Associate Professor and Program Director of Communication, Media, and Ethics at the American Christian University. I am here with our COM 4603 interview session. It's creating social media presence and cultural movements. We're looking at a series of guests in this course, working professionals that may have seemingly distinct and different positions and professions and areas of expertise, but we're also locating common thread between them, and we're recognizing the diversity of opportunities that we can embrace with a communication or media focused degree. And for this interview session, I'm joined by a veteran idea man, right? if that's the term, and anyone that works in the creative industries understands, hey, we create terms all the time, and what is language but a symbolic way that we can express our ideas about the world. But I'm joined by Brian Neff today, and excited to have Brian join us. We're linking up from the city of brotherly love, right? He's joining us from Philadelphia, where Brian is potentially on top of a number of various projects. Maybe we'll get a tease about one or two of them, but he has a healthy and growing background in tabletop gaming, right? Among other pet projects and interest areas. But we'll focus a lot of our discussion today on tabletop gaming and his experience there. Brian's not just a player, right? He's not one of these celebrity poker type people. He's a developer. And so one of the exciting aspects of having Brian come and join us is that he's able to speak to the execution of ideas, of taking an idea and turning it into a project that eventually becomes a product, and one that we can engage. So that's very exciting. Don't want to give away too much yet, but Brian, welcome. If you'd like, take a minute or so, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you're at now. And we have some student questions that we'll queue up and work through, probably out of chronological order if there ever was such a thing. We're just glad to be able to connect in this digital age at interesting time and have a discussion.
Interesting time indeed. Yeah, I'm Brian Neff. I graduated from the University of Oklahoma with a communication degree. Dr. Castleberry was one of my instructors when I was there. I'm very happy to join and sort of share all of the stuff that I've learned over, post-education, and how to apply that sort of stuff. So I currently am a freelancer working in tabletop games. So I work mostly for myself. I contract for a lot of other companies. And lots of upsides and downsides with that. I work entirely from home. And I've worked on a number of tabletop game projects over the course of my career. I believe my portfolio is sitting at 30 or 40 published games now, which I'm very happy with. So that's pretty good. Additionally, on the side, I am one of the organizers for a couple of different charity organizations that operate in the tabletop gaming space. We're all very much about building community and doing stuff like that. So, it's sort of nice to pitch in. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
No, that's excellent. And while I think our students did hear a little bit about some of your earliest volunteer work, and there might be a question or two geared to that early work, absolutely enjoyed that opportunity. You feel free to transition those stories and experiences to some of these that you're talking about more in the present. Let's kick these questions off. with a question from Kelsey. All right, we'll hear from Kelsey. Hopefully, it'll be queued up for you, and you've had a chance to listen to these already. And we'll see where the conversation takes us.
Hi, my name is Kelsey, and I have a few questions for you. Okay, first, what are some of your favorite projects or games you've created?
Okay, so you teased that your portfolio continues to grow, upwards of 30 games. How do you choose between your children, right? As they say.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of creative people will sort of have the analogy a little bit where you have sort of labors of love, and then you have some projects that you use to pay the bills. And that's definitely the case, in my situation. Not that I'm not proud of all of the work that I've done, which I am, but some of them are just less stressful, more fun than some of the other ones. I just recently started working for a company called Restoration Games that takes a lot of old games from the 70s, 80s, and 90s and sort of updates them and revamps them, and does things like that. And so we're currently working on a project called Return to Dark Tower, which is a remake of an old 1981 Milton Bradley game that my dad had in his attic when I was like a little wee one. Yeah, and that's pretty consistently been, I think, the top project that I've worked on. It's been an incredible fusion of technology and gameplay mechanics and art and all of this other stuff, and it's definitely been one of the larger projects that I've worked on because we have 20 people from 6 different countries working on that thing. So
what was that? What's the title of it again?
Called Return to Dark Tower. No relation to the Stephen King book.
Okay. You mentioned Milton Bradley, and for those students that have long since moved away from material games to digital games, Milton Bradley is one of the title companies of the board game era, right? Sort of in that kind of history of toys and hobby games in the mid to late 20th century. Do they still have a role here, or have the sort of the rights to the intellectual property expired, or what is that process?
So it's really interesting, and when I say that this was one of the largest projects that I worked on, one of the people that we have working on this thing full time is a trained IP lawyer and all of that sort of stuff. So there are lots of vagaries of copyright that sort of come into play whenever you're working with those sort of intellectual properties. And there's a lot of running things past people and making sure that all of the stakeholders are sort of getting their say. So yeah, there's a lot of sort of things to navigate whenever we're dealing with a larger project, and especially a licensed project like that.
Wow. Is this one of the books that we use in the communication major, and not at all attempting to hijack student questions, but sort of synthesize them for us, is one of the books that we often use is Henry Jenkins, Stanford, Joshua Green's Spreadable Media, and this is a kind of evolution of some of Jenkins' earlier theoretical work. One of his most notable books being Convergence Culture, which is also one of his most notable media theories. Is this new version of Return to Dark Tower, does it still just maintain that traditional kind of singular medium of play, or has it adapted to kind of fit this convergence culture that we now live in?
Well, so we're doing a lot of neat stuff with sort of technology integration. The game actually takes place in 3 different, we call them ludological spaces. Whenever we're talking about Dark Tower, so we have a board, and there's a board on the table, and then there's a giant mechanical tower. It's about 1.5 feet tall, and it sits in the middle of the board, and it has a bunch of stuff that happens, and then it also has Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and all of that stuff that's communicating to a phone. So we're integrating as much of that technology as we possibly can. Back the original Dark Tower back in 1981 was sort of a technological marvel by itself. It had a computer with a microchip inside this tower, which totally unheard of for that that type of game. And we really wanted to sort of carry forward that type of expression and that sort of multimedia idea whenever we sort of brought our take to the table.
I love it. I love it. Is it still in development, or can we look for it soon? What is that?
It is still in development. We've been working on it for about 2.5 years now. But we finally have a set release date. It is February 2021.
Oh, excellent. All right. Let the countdown begin, right? You're but a branch of some continuing marketing action. All right. Let's jump back to Kelsey here and continue with her questioning.
Then describe some experiences that have pushed your career forward.
All right. So do you have any parallel or alternative experiential stories of maybe projects that really helped you kind of pivot, shift gears?
Yeah. I originally started working in the video game industry. I, right directly out of college, was doing quality assurance on video games and then sort of clawing my way up there. But a lot of the experiences that have sort of pushed me forward in my career was, going out and going to conventions and conferences and meeting people face to face. It's a really big part of the tabletop gaming culture is, every couple of months, there's a huge tabletop gaming convention that happens somewhere in the country. And there's also a lot of local conventions and things like that happen. Obviously, none of those are happening right now. But we hope to get back to it because that both sort of personally and professionally is one of the most important things that happens sort of in the tabletop culture.
And that's, speaking of the tabletop culture, it brings to mind a question that Emily submitted, one of our students, and she writes, or rather asks if you could describe what a typical workday is like for you.
Sure. One of the reasons that I like this job so much is because all of my work days look fairly different. Depends on what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. Today I sort of opened up spreadsheets and I worked on a bunch of spreadsheets and math and things like that. A couple of days ago, I got to go out and sort of do drop tests, which is I was dropping plastic on the ground to sort of figure out, whether or not this model that we had built would break. And then a couple of days before that, I got to sit down and have a very long and in-depth conversation with a couple of amazing artists, for a game that we might end up using them for. So, a daily workday for me is incredibly varied, and that's one of the reasons why I love this job so much. But the sort of constant that happens throughout each of my work days is I'm constantly learning, I'm constantly communicating with new people. And one of the most important skills that I can use is sort of being able to interface with different kinds of people, and being able to recognize, like the strengths that they bring and what I should be talking to them about and that sort of stuff.
You are currently the only person in this conference.
It appears that we have lost a Dr. Castleberry. If you'll give us one moment, we'll be back. Did you make it back? Well, we may have to fix this one in post.
All right.
Technical difficulties.
Man, this good tech we're having here. We're just broadcasting too much high quality information.
I know.
We had glitches a couple of weeks ago, and It wasn't on my end. I wasn't the one getting booted out, but now I am, right? So that's what I get for not getting that Wi-Fi extender figured out in time for this. But we'll continue. We'll continue on nonetheless. Let's hear from Rachel, who has a couple of questions.
Hello, Brian. I hope you are doing well and staying safe during this time. The two questions I would like to ask you are, can you tell us a little bit about the work you do while organizing gaming conventions? And the second, what can we expect from your company in the near future?
Okay, so talk to us about conventions and what role that plays in what you do.
Sure. Conventions are important for a couple of reasons. The first and sort of most major one is it is the time when everybody in the industry gets sort of face-to-face time. There are a lot of people who do what I do who don't work in an office. They work remotely, or they have their own office set up somewhere else, and we work in sort of pods and things like that. So conventions are a really good sort of face-to-face time for us, and it's an option that we don't get all of that often. A lot of the day-to-day interactions that we have with our colleagues look a lot like this, where we're on a webcam or sort of in a virtual room. And while it's great, and there's a lot of reasons there's a lot of sort of upside to that. That face-to-face time is really, really important. Both personally and professionally. We all like to sort of enjoy the people that we work with. But then on top of that, it's good to get to know people and get to sort of know their strengths and things like that. And that sort of face-to-face time is the best way to do that. The second reason that conventions are good is because the barrier of entry to those things is generally pretty low. While it's not free, it's still relatively cheap to go to one of these things. Especially in comparison to sort of the professional conferences that I'm sure Dr. Castleberry can tell you about. If you can get $80 and a plane ticket in a hotel room, you can go and interact with designers and artists and fans and celebrities and all of this other stuff. And so, as a professional, that's very important to me because it means that I can sort of get boots on the ground and see the people who are consuming the things that I put out.
Mm-hmm.
And then sort of finally, the third reason that, conventions are incredibly important is because they offer time for us to actually engage with the product that we're putting out. As a person who makes games, I don't play a lot of them, mostly because I don't have time. I spend a lot of my time doing the creative process and doing the work, and not a whole lot of time actually sitting down and playing games. And so, having that time that is set aside, that I can't be at a desk working, that I can't be, pushing these creative projects forward, is really nice because then I still get to engage with people who are excited about the thing. It's really hard to be excited about gaming after working on it for 8 hours a day. So, having those sort of weekends off is incredibly important and sort of gives me a chance to recharge.
Let me piggyback off of Rachel's question in a unique kind of way. We happen to find ourselves in a period of social distancing, of a number of varying policies, from stay at home to quote unquote safer at home, as some local governors might rephrase it. To outright quarantine, right? To use that sort of dystopian qualifier. And when you talk about the importance of the community building that takes place at conventions, especially, what does that impact look like? Does it slow down the work of these organizations, or do you find creative ways around these barriers?
A little bit of both. Obviously this is unprecedented, at least in my lifetime. And so there's a lot of sort of muddling through when it comes to how we're dealing with a lot of these situations. Some of those communities are utilizing technology, and they're creating these online conventions through Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of these different platforms. And I think that's incredible. It's a great way to sort of rebrand and interact with that community in sort of a safe and positive way. You know, and then there's other companies that are just sort of shutting everything down and, you know, calling it a wash and we'll see you next year. And, you know, I think it depends on sort of the capabilities of those organizations to sort of be agile and react to things like this. You know, a couple of the companies that I work for are doing an incredible job. You know, now that we're quarantined at home, they're using Facebook Live and YouTube and all of this stuff to sort of constantly be present for the communities that they've helped build. The company that I mentioned before, Restoration Games, is doing live game design sessions where we're actually sort of filming parts of our workday and broadcasting those live so that everybody can sort of get a peek behind the curtain. So, you know, while we are in this sort of dangerous and again, unprecedented situation nationally, I think a lot of companies are doing a really good job finding new and creative ways to sort of deal with and engage their audience and their user base.
No, absolutely. And, you know, higher ed's not that different. We're trying to make good use of unique circumstances as well. And sometimes kind of these conditions that you know, kind of stifle us or can stifle us. But fortunately, we have digital technologies and we're able to receive messages from our students. Let's hear a question or two from Delaney, who wants to kind of engage.
Where do you find inspiration for game development?
All right. Oh, it's
Where do you
short but quick, but important. Where do you find inspiration?
Everywhere. And that sounds like such a cliche answer whenever you know, whenever you just sort of lay it out like that. But one of I've a very smart sort of game design colleague, and you know, the way that he always talks about game design is it's a designer's job to communicate a unique experience to an audience. And so, you know, the thing that we always try and do sort of as game designers is we try and tap into the unique experiences that we're the only people that have those experiences. And we try and communicate those in a unique way. And that's really what game design is we're wrapping all of these sort of unique ways of telling stories around, you know, art and mechanics and math and all of this other stuff. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, the thing that, you know, I'm trying to get across is, hey, I have an experience that I want to share with you. And here's a rule book for how to have that experience. Here are some tools for how to sort of accelerate that experience and help you understand the thing that I'm trying to get across. So, you know, in that way, lots of different things, you know, books that I've seen or books that I've read are, you know, incredible sources of inspiration. Movies, all of the pop culture, but, you know, sometimes even like food and landmarks and travel and vacation and all of that stuff is all uniquely important for me as a game designer, because my job is to have experiences so that I can communicate them effectively to other people.
Let me see if I do have another question from Delaney or if I queued up the same one.
What was your most successful project?
All right. So we've talked about maybe like favorites, but what about level of success? You know, what of your projects, what's kind of at the top of the trophy case in a different category?
I'm trying to see if I have it in here or if I have it in another room. I think it's in the living room, so I won't be able to grab the box. But last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, I was actually just finishing up the project that I think so far has done the best. And it was a game called Betrayal Legacy. And it was with a game designer who's been working in the industry for 25 years now, an incredible designer named Rob Davio. And we sort of hooked up and we started working together on this with a third guy named Noah Cohen, who, you know, we've sort of continued our work beyond this because we've worked so well together. But yeah, it was relatively well received. It won a couple of awards in 2018. So yeah, it was 2 years ago. And has again, before Dark Tower came along, was I think probably my favorite project. So very happy about that one, both sort of professionally and personally.
What kinds of, when you're working with various companies and various business levels, business models, what does the tabletop gaming industry recognize as its kind of standard bearers in terms of awards? What organizations are representative of that kind of information communication?
Sure. It's interesting because the tabletop gaming is sort of in a unique place when it comes to awards and accolades and things like that, because they're all very regional. There isn't really a sort of uniting body around that sort of stuff in the United States. The Europeans sort of have that. They have the Spiel des Jahres awards. Those are German. And those are sort of the very top of the heap, but a very specific type of game sort of gets put to them, and that's not the types of games that I make. But it depends. The places that we sort of look at are, we look down in the Southeast. They have a couple of really major conventions that hand out awards, and those are a really big deal. The Midwest has Gen Con, and Gen Con is hands out their awards, and that's a really big deal. And then sort of on the West Coast, there is an association called the American Tabletop Association that gives out awards. And we were, very lucky to be nominated by both Gen Con and the American Tabletop Awards for Betrayal Legacy. So,
and the American Tabletop Association, just to clarify, on the West Coast, completely separate organization from the American Carrot Top organization, also located out on the West Coast.
Totally different.
Lower membership, the American Carrot Top Association. But let me play a couple of questions. If class would be booing me off stage right now, I was lucky. Let's take a question from Lane. Maybe two questions from Lane.
Hi, my name is Lane Smith, and I have a couple questions I'd like to ask. First, what started your fascination towards creating content for board games?
We'll pause there, right? Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about your origin.
So, I mentioned a little bit earlier, I started playing, or I started my career in video games. And video games are great, and I still have a lot of friends that sort of do that. And I think I knew very early that I wanted to work sort of in gaming, in interactive media in some way. And the sort of easiest approach for where I was to start in video games. But ever since I was a little kid, I had been playing Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering and all of these sort of geeky tabletop games. And that was always sort of where my heart was whenever it came to gaming. And so, it was incredibly lucky that I encountered a number of people that I ended up encountering when I was still in college that were sort of trying to follow the same path that I was, because, a lot of us wouldn't have made it without the help of a lot of people in our community. Whenever we talk about tabletop gaming being truly grassroots, we really mean it. There are a couple of very, very large companies that exist, but for the most part, the entire tabletop industry is driven by people whose companies employ 20 people or less. So it's an incredible sort of grassroots way of running an entire community and industry. Which has upsides and downsides, but I think my original fascination with gaming in general was that community. It was a place where you could sort of go and everybody could sort of speak this shared language and everybody knew what you were talking about. Whereas when you went outside and you talked about it to a normal person, normal people, when you talked about it to sort of an everyday person, they wouldn't know what you were talking about. And I always thought that that was very, very interesting, both as a game designer and as a person who went on to study communication.
It's interesting that you mention this idea of the gaming community and a shared language, right? To use your words. Earlier, you noted that maybe the European communities are a little more unified than the regions within the U.S. Can you sort of speculate or speak to how they overcome more language barriers over there? How is it? Is it the closer geographical region, or in what ways could you suggest that they may have an easier time communicating or a more unified time communicating despite intercultural barriers?
Sure.
Barriers.
I mean, if I had to speculate on it, one of the things that happened relatively recently is the United States has sort of experienced this renaissance in tabletop games. Back before about 2009, there were only two large companies that were putting out games in the United States. You had Hasbro and you had Wizards of the Coast. And those were the only two companies that were really putting things out in a large scale. And then sort of with the advent of a lot of new and different technologies, Kickstarter being one of them, crowdfunding and things like that, as well as better supply lines and better production, a lot of other companies sort of started getting into tabletop game production. And that's sort of where you got that regionality to come out of, because you had companies that were really, really successful in the southeast, but they couldn't find distribution anywhere else in the country. You had that a lot in the Midwest, where you had people who were putting out 2,000 copies of a game and they couldn't find distribution lines outside of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Missouri. And I think you still find a lot of that stuff. Whereas in Europe, you had all of those companies were shipping to the same sort of local shipping hub. And it was very easy to distribute all of the same games and all of the same experiences to a massive group of people. And so they didn't go through a lot of the same renaissance that we went through. They had just sort of had those experiences available to them, in one way or another, since the 60s and 70s.
That's fascinating. And certainly, as we try to talk about in a media context, sometimes is understanding the history of a thing, understanding the history of a mass medium of communication. We can certainly look at gaming, the gaming world. I mean, it now kind of transcends multiple mass mediums, but even tabletop, this is a form of entertainment. It's a leisurely activity. It's an expression of communication, and it's a practice of storytelling and skill at a high level. Let me cue up the next question from Lane.
Second, how did you take a communications degree and pursue the field of content creating for tabletop gaming?
Okay, so let's back up a little bit more in Brian's origin here, right? Talk to us about that process of translation from a communication degree, which sometimes we look at in a very limited way, and how do you expand that into what you are doing?
So communication, this is sort of a Com 101 thing to say, but communication is everywhere, and we use it all of the time. Everything is communication. All of the different things that the ways that we communicate are, sort of fundamental. Communication is how we interact with other people, and sort of learning about those interactions, and sort of how to mold those interactions in a way that is valuable, is sort of how I've taken my comm degree and applied it to a lot of different areas and fields. Whenever we talk about things like, a shared language and jargon and things like that, being able to identify what those things are and what communities use the language that they use and why they use it, thinking about communities in a broader context, not just like a group of people, but like artists are a community, programmers are a community, teachers are a community, students are a community, and they sort of have this way that they communicate that we can help identify, and it helps us better interact with those people. And so that's largely what a communication degree has done for me. Is it's helped me identify more effective ways to talk to people. And when my entire job is about communicating experiences, personally, from as a producer to a consumer, and also sort of in a business context, communicating the things that I need from an artist, communicating the things that I want a program to do. Having that sort of somewhat formal training and that sort of stuff is incredibly valuable. And I come back to it, on a daily basis.
Oh, excellent. And and I think for those students, sometimes that undergraduate process is it's a plethora of emotional experiences and potential awakenings, realizations. Students are kind of, I think we're geared to look for that concrete reality, and sometimes it takes trusting and buying into that process of the broader information and knowledge and intellectual skill set and practical skill sets that we pick up in that type of humanities degree that we're then going to translate into other contexts and settings and career opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
I think Lane may have one more question, and then I'm going to jump over to Kieran for a little bit.
Last question. What advice would you give to communication majors who are looking for mentors? Thank you.
That's a very good question. So communication majors that are looking for mentors, the best advice that I can give is reach out to the people that you want to have mentor you. Reach out to people who are doing the thing that you're doing. There are a lot of good sort of mentorship programs all over everywhere for specific skill sets and things like that. But I think that more. I was surprised at the number of people who were willing to sort of take time out of their day and help me in the process that I was going through with. And I sort of never would have gotten there if I hadn't opened a channel of communication and sort of asked about it. Sometimes you'll get told no, and that's okay. I think a lot of the process of learning and that sort of stuff is getting told no and sort of learning from your mistakes and figuring out how to go about things better next time. But you never know what you can get out of a situation if you don't ask.
No, absolutely, and that ties into a theme we've tackled throughout the semester, throughout the course, and that's been talking about the value of internships. And initially, probably, I think there was a few rough draft questions relating to that. It's been a hot topic with our students, and we've encouraged it. But also, I want to link it to our final project, our final assignment in this class, and say, the students, just communicating with Brian and the students now, is our students were tasked with locating their own independent individual to draft their own interview protocol for, to host and execute the interview. And we encourage them to be deliberately trying to connect with someone that could be that potential, conduit to where they want to be in a 3-year and a 5-year type of situation, right? It's sometimes in a 10-year situation, because you've got to forge those connections. Even if there's no window of opportunity right now, if we can strike a positive impression, you don't know what that next availability looks like, or when they become in need, who they first think of when a task comes up and there's a need for fresh perspective or a new body right there to assist. Kieran, we've had conversations about Europe And here's another successful product out of Europe, and I tease, he's not a product, but Kieran did safely make it back to the UK, and he has a question or two that I will queue up.
Hello, Brian. My name is Kieran. I have two questions. First one is, can you describe your creative process?
Okay. Ooh, it's a deep cut, I think.
The big one. Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, first and foremost, Kieran, I'm glad you made it back okay. But so to describe my creative process, my creative process is a lot about iterating and gathering data. And the way that sort of works for me, and it works differently for a lot of people, but everyone, at least that I've encountered that does what I do, has a similar process, maybe in a different order, is sort of having an idea, getting out what we call a minimum viable product, the smallest possible thing that you can make in order to sort of get your idea across and make sure that things work. Sending that to as many people as I possibly can, and then talking to them about it. And that's sort of how my creative process works.
Sounds like you're getting feedback. And
am I getting a little feedback?
seriously.
Unfortunate. Let me see if I can't fix that real fast.
No. I mean, it sounds like you're describing the process of soliciting feedback from others and following through with listening to it.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I thought you said I was getting feedback on my microphone. No, yeah, soliciting feedback, getting feedback is the most important thing as far as games as a product perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Is we have an audience. We try and target that audience. We ask that audience what they want, and then we try and give it to them. And so, a lot of things, I think that whenever you look at people who are trying to get into creative work and trying to start doing creative work, they have a lot of big ideas about how, well, I'm gonna take this idea and it's huge, and I'm gonna put it on paper, and I'm gonna continue editing it until it's perfect, and then I'm gonna put it out. And I think a lot of creative professionals will say that's a really bad way to sort of do that. It's a really inefficient use of your time. Get down something that is imperfect, show it to people, get their feedback, and edit from there. And that's, that is absolutely one of the most important lessons that I learned very, very early on in my career is, I'm going to take something and all of my ideas are going to be bad. But, the only thing that can make them good is showing them to people and sort of interacting and figuring out what rings true and what strikes a chord. And some ideas never will. Some ideas are just not workable, bad ideas. But that's okay, because if you are, if you want to make this your job, and if you want to do this, you have to have a lot of ideas, and you have to continually put down bad ideas, because for every one good idea, there's 10 bad ideas. And for every 10 bad ideas, there's 10 awful ideas. So, you have to just churn through as many of them as you can.
Mm-hmm. It's such a good lesson, such a good takeaway. For a couple of recent writing projects of my own, I've been studying film canon a little bit deeper and looking at specific kind of career paths of directors and sort of charting through their filmography and researching it at the same time, finding a lot of background materials and things. And a theme that I pick up on and we're talking about some of the most revered, filmmakers in American history, at least, and ideas that they had from the very beginning. And when I use that term auteur, it's a French word, right? It's referring to that type of filmmaker that's not just making movies. They're a part of the process from beginning to end, right? They usually have a hand in the script, if not write it outright. They're overseeing production as well as directing. They're probably in the editing room and so on. But those type of filmmakers in a historical sense. But you will find this is where they kind of transcend that commerce side, that money making side, and they're also showing their artistic side, that they're an artist. But I find a lot of examples where ideas that were rejected or they could never quite piece together in the right way for a specific film project, if they continue to forge a career, they find little ways of refining and inserting back into, a later film, a different, seemingly unrelated, intellectual property, but the theme resonates with them, and it kind of incubates, right? It's maturing, and or maybe even it just becomes a part of their reflective process. Or to use, a different media scholarly term, it becomes an intertextual reference, right? It's their own little Easter egg or hidden reference to another reference. And I'm willing to bet in the tabletop gaming world, it's littered with Easter eggs, right? And
Yeah. We actually the term that we use to describe things like that is we call them love letters. And so, we have love letters all over the place for things like that. And a lot of times, it's a really interesting, when you talk to other game designers and things like that, you'll say like, this mechanic or this piece of art or this thing doesn't really seem related to this project that you made. What was it? And they'll just say, oh, it was a love letter to a project that I scrapped 15 years ago. And especially if you follow a designer in much the same way that you can follow a director or a filmographer or things like that, you see all sorts of that sort of stuff. Whether it be whether it be in like mechanics and the way that you sort of roll dice or allocate cards or do resources or things like that, or even artistically, when you can see like artistic through lines for a company that's been putting out games for 15 years and they use the same artist or the same look. It's really, really interesting.
Awesome. I'm picking up a new key term. I'm going to use it. I'm thrilled about that. Well, let me shift over to Kieran once again.
And the second question, can you explain what part of your job you enjoy doing the most?
Oh, what's your favorite part of what you do?
That's a rough one. My favorite part of my job, I think, is when I get to do something new. One of I sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, but my day job, a lot of my days look really different. But one of my favorite things is to have an experience that I've truly never had before. And it happens less and less sort of the more you do this sort of thing. When you find something that's like, truly inspired, truly unique, things like that. It happens all the time, right, when you get started. But as you sort of go along, you sort of start to see patterns and things like that. But occasionally, every once in a while, there is still a moment where, you sort of get to revert back to being a fan of tabletop games or games in general. And you say, well, wow, that's super clever. And, part of what I do, at least for a lot of the people that I work for, is finding those moments where you can really go, oh wow, that's clever, that's novel. Both as a positive and negative, tabletop gaming relies a lot on novelty, and so part of our sort of design goal is to create novel experiences, whether it's between the way that things interact or doing something or making people do things that they've never done before. And it happens in a lot of different ways. So yeah, that's my favorite part, is when I see someone sort of accomplish that thing and I get to go, oh, that's real clever. That's super neat.
Mm-hmm. Oh, very good. So what you're not saying is that it's super successful when you miss all your deadlines and then kind of scramble together first draft stuff to submit to your employers at the last minute. Are you saying that's a bad strategy?
Yeah. Not a great way to approach creative work or professional work in general.
Or maybe academic work.
Yeah.
Let me circle back around. Right, we're going to come into the end stretch here. A little bit more from Kelsey, and then I have a nice closing question that Emily had submitted as we end this conversation.
How do reviews affect the development of a game?
Like this.
Ooh. This is something that that I deal with a lot, constantly. Reviews affect a game a lot, much in the same way that sort of reviews affect movies. The actual as far as the actual development of the game, we generally try to not send things out to reviewers until we have everything locked down and we're sort of pencils down. We like to send them finished products. But the thing that it does affect a lot is the way that we tend to market games like that. So just as a little bit of dipping my toe in the marketing field a little bit, a lot of what we do is we sort of shotgun our games out to a lot of different types of reviewers. Reviewers that are moms that have families, and then reviewers that are hardcore gamers, and sort of everyone in between. And then we find out sort of who it resonates with, and then we try and market to those people more than we would market to people that the game would be less successful with. So as far as development, sort of not really, because we don't really get to reviews until until the game's already finished. But from like a marketing and sales perspective, reviews are hugely important.
Oh, this is good, and we can think about that kind of feedback. That's internal and external. If we're broadening it beyond this conversation of expect that your work will be critiqued, and expect that a healthy employer, a healthy boss is, they're critiquing it for the good of the company, for the good of the organization. And sometimes we have to be able to let go of our impulse to hold on to our ideas, that they are somehow complete. And not to overuse the film reference, but film is a collaborative medium, meaning no matter how much say or input maybe the average director is, it takes everyone, the lighting design, the set design, the performers, it is. So you have to take that into consideration. The larger the organization, the more you want to be confident and in your role. You want to be able to stand up for your ideas and defend them. But you don't want to get too dogmatic for too long, too many times, because there is so much to learn from others. And ideally, we're always growing. We've got. I love the setup here on the last pair of questions. I'd encouraged Kelsey to record just a little bit more, because I thought she wrote some really good stuff this week, and then Emily had a nice closing question. So we're gonna finish up here with Kelsey, and then I'll question.
And finally, what advice would you give to someone looking to be in this career field? Thank you.
All right. What advice do you have? Someone has had an aha moment listening to you. They didn't realize, never even thought about gaming. What advice do you have to that future individual?
Get your idea down onto a table. Whatever you have, whatever cool idea you have, like sketch it out, get it down, get a minimum viable product, put it down on the table, start playing it. It's a very large conversation that we have around projects, and especially with new people, is pretty consistently the first hurdle to doing anything like this is actually getting something on the table. A lot of people are afraid to do it for a lot of different reasons. Their idea might be bad, or someone might not like it, or all sorts of different stuff. But get something down and start doing. Stop thinking about the thing that you want to do and start doing it instead. And that sounds really weird whenever you're talking about a field that is a lot about thinking and working in spreadsheets and doing a lot of sort of cerebral activities. But I didn't start having success doing this thing that I did until I literally cut a part of a pizza box and drew on it to make a board, and then sort of made some cards. And I think over the years I've refined my methods of doing things like that. I now use I use computer programs, and I know how to use InDesign and Photoshop and things like that now. But I'm never gonna forget that I started with a permanent marker and a pizza box.
Oh, only the best pizza boxes, right? Only
Yeah,
the
it's true. It's true.
you have them imported from New York. You don't eat out of them first. It's a whole list of ways that you elevate that process. I love it. I tell them all the time, just because I have a planned script at a conference doesn't mean I'm going to follow it. And that's not me advocating chaos theory. That's me noting that like any public speaking, and I'm shifting the parallel here, but engagement that you give, there you have choice. And I may, prepare to kind of eloquently read my pre-written words, but oftentimes what has worked for me is I pull over the cocktail napkin that's at the table with the pins and the hotel paper or whatever, and I shorthand just some ideas so that then I can engage, the public. Or my goodness, I talk to my students, and many of them in this class, we shared a film class together in the fall, and I'm the curator of the screening list, and I still bought my own leather bound journal and brought it every week and sat in the back and took notes. And it's part of my process. It's training from as a student, but I'm still doing it because I'm not only a teacher and educator. I'm at times, in some ways, a scholar, right? I have scholarly projects, and I'll say this over the spring break, right? Which I work over spring break, but there was extra time over the break and before it to get into a writing project that I was finishing, and I was reviewing some media for it, and I was taking notes by hand here. I was feeling out ideas, and not everything I wrote down makes it into the typed document. Not everything in the typed document gets approved by the reviewers, and not everything approved by the viewers gets approved by the editor. And we're trying to collaborate to create something that's going to be meaningful to that ultimate audience that it will encounter in the future. Speaking of the future, here's a final question that was submitted by Emily. And Emily writes, what goals have you established for the future? Do you have any future goals, or a final opportunity perhaps tell us about some future projects, including if you have any, of your own types of maybe solicitations or surveys or ways we can kind of engage your passion area.
Sure. One of the things that I have discovered, at least over the past couple of years, is that I can sort of steer my career in a direction where I can make it intersect with more of the stuff that I truly love. Not to say that I don't truly love gaming, but more of the stuff that I truly love. I sort of got to do that very briefly last year when we got to collaborate with Warner Brothers on a Scooby-Doo game. I grew up watching Scooby-Doo. I love Scooby-Doo, and we got to use that IP and sort of use all of their archives of things in order to make a game based on it. And so I think my goal for the future for me is to do a lot more of that. Because that way I can leverage the things that I'm extra passionate about, and I can sort of do cool stuff like that. As far as what that means for the future, not a lot of stuff I can talk about right now. But I'll let you know. You'll be the first person to know. Yeah, I mean, I hope that I get to continue doing stuff like that. One of the coolest things that I got to do last year is I actually got to go down to the WB lot in California, in Burbank, and I got to tour their top to bottom 5-story building full of all of their Warner Brothers properties, which was incredible. They had all of the Lego stuff. They had a floor for Scooby-Doo. They had a floor for Harry Potter. And it was really, really neat to get to sort of interact with that stuff as a peer rather than interacting with that stuff as a fan.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Well, very impressive. Brian, we celebrate your success, and wish you continued excellence. And thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, even working from home in quarantine, right? But thank you for sort of budgeting an opportunity to come kind of speak to us, share with us about your journey and experiences, and we'll be thrilled to hear about your future successes.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for all of the wonderful questions, COM 4603 students. I hope that everybody is safe and stays healthy.
Very good. And for the class, or for our extra audience viewers, we thank you for seeking it out, for tuning it in, for overcoming any blips, any sort of technical foibles. And one thing as a closing thought that brought me great comfort and great relief during this madcap social distancing quarantine time is watching how on live television these shows that are so polished, so sophisticated, so savvy really show their warts and have peeled back the curtain. And if you watch something, and just for one example, there are many. For one example, you could look at late night television, right? It's such a streamlined process, and I'm talking about late night talk shows, right? The Tonight Show, The Late Show, and so on. All of these types of programs, and they're really stripped down because these people, these crews cannot get together. They can't meet on set, and so they're doing all of this remote work. And a lot of it is kind of ugly, right? It's ugly in terms of maybe like it's aesthetic production, but it's ugly because it's stripped down. I think it's so important. I think it's so valuable because it's highlighting to us not only the viability of what media is as an industry of professional opportunities, but it's also letting us peel back the curtain and see and understand these are still people, right? But they're succeeding through collaborative efforts in a collaborative medium, and that's where our encouragement is for our students, that you're just not passively sitting here waiting for the thing to come to you, that you're willing to be out there, make new connections, fail at something if that's what it takes. And not just a class, we're not talking about classes, but to see the door closed, not necessarily in your face, but in your mind's eye, right? To understand that's not the area I'm heading toward. It's exciting. It's not for me. We want you to be seeking that out, finding those opportunities, and hopefully our interview series has provided keen insight into that thinking process for young professionals in communication. But we have so loved the opportunities when we bring in those outside of the major as well. Communication, here's the open secret. Everybody uses it. It's the raw ingredients of human exchange, and we're just working to kind of strengthen and specialize these skill sets, these talents. We thank you for listening to this series. Thanks to Brian and all of our guests in this series. We're looking forward to your final projects, and hopefully hearing a little bit about that, or having some sort of taste showcase as we close out the semester for 4603, creating social media presence and cultural creating social media presence and cultural movements. Thank you.